The champagne flute shattered against the marble floor a split second before my sister's palm connected with my cheek. The sound echoed through the garden venue as 200 guests fell silent, their conversations dying mid-sentence. "You've always been jealous of me," Amber hissed, her perfectly manicured nails digging into my arm. "Now you're trying to ruin the most important night of my life." I stood there, tasting blood from my split lip, watching her turn back toward the crowd with practiced tears glistening in her eyes. Then the patio doors opened, and her fiancé stepped out, his expression shifting from confusion to recognition as his eyes met mine. "Natalie," he said, his voice carrying across the sudden silence. "Ms. Carrington, I mean." "Hi, boss." My sister froze, her theatrical sob catching in her throat. "Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you." 3 months earlier, I had been standing in almost the same spot, in my parents' backyard in Millbrook Heights, helping to hang string lights for what my mother called a casual family gathering. Nothing in the Hartley household was ever truly casual, but I had learned long ago to simply nod and comply during my brief visits home. I was 32 years old, living in Seattle, and had managed to build a life that felt authentically mine. Yet every time I returned to this picture-perfect suburb of Portland, I felt myself shrinking back into the role I'd occupied for the first 18 years of my life. The forgettable middle daughter. The one whose accomplishments were always footnotes to Amber's starring moments. "Natalie, you're doing it wrong," my mother, Diane, called from the patio, her voice carrying that particular tone of disappointed patience she reserved exclusively for me. "The lights need to drape, not hang straight." Amber specifically requested a romantic ambience. I adjusted the string of Edison bulbs for the 3rd time, biting back the observation that Amber wasn't even present to appreciate my efforts. She was, according to the family group chat I'd been added to without consent, at a spa in downtown Portland getting a pre-announcement glow treatment. The casual gathering was actually an engagement party, though this detail had been mentioned to me only 5 days prior when my mother called to inform me rather than invite me that my presence was expected. Not requested. Expected. "Your sister is marrying exceptionally well," my mother had said over the phone, her emphasis on the word exceptionally loaded with implications. Daniel Rothman. His family owns Rothman Development Corporation. You've probably heard of them, even in Seattle. I had heard of them. Rothman Development was one of the Pacific Northwest's largest commercial real estate firms, with projects spanning from Vancouver to San Francisco. What my mother didn't know, what none of my family knew, was that I knew the Rothman portfolio intimately. My firm, Meridian Architecture Group, had competed against Rothman-backed projects on 3 separate occasions over the past 18 months. "That's wonderful news," I'd said, keeping my voice neutral. "I'm happy for her." The happiness was genuine, even if it came wrapped in exhaustion. Amber, my younger sister by 3 years, had always possessed a particular talent for landing in advantageous situations. She had married her college boyfriend at 24, divorced him at 27 with a generous settlement, and had been strategically dating within Portland's business elite ever since. I felt no judgment about this. Amber had chosen a path that worked for her, just as I had chosen mine. What wore me down wasn't her success, but the way my family wielded it as evidence of my comparative failure. "You should take notes," my father, Gerald, had added from the background of that phone call. "Maybe you'd be settled down by now instead of playing architect in Seattle." Playing architect. As if my master's degree from UC Berkeley and my position as lead designer at one of Seattle's most innovative architecture firms was an elaborate game of pretend. Now, standing on a ladder in my parents' backyard, adjusting fairy lights for a party celebrating my sister's 3rd engagement, I wondered why I continued to accept these invitations that felt more like summonses. "Perfect," my mother declared, though her tone suggested it was anything but. "Now come help me with the catering setup. The staff is arriving in an hour, and nothing is organized properly." I climbed down from the ladder, noting that my father had disappeared into his study, as he always did when actual work needed doing. The division of labor in the Hartley household had always been clear. My mother managed appearances, my father provided financial resources and occasional pronouncements, and the children were expected to reflect well on both. Amber had mastered this system. I had abandoned it. My older brother, Trevor, had found a middle path. He lived in Bend, ran an adventure tourism company, and maintained enough geographic distance to avoid most family obligations while remaining sufficiently conventional to avoid criticism. He was supposed to attend today's party but had texted that morning claiming a client emergency. I suspected the emergency was his unwillingness to spend 6 hours being compared unfavorably to Amber's latest achievement. Your sister specifically requested the seafood display to be arranged in a spiral pattern, my mother was saying as we entered the kitchen, where catering boxes covered every available surface. She saw something similar at the Westbrook Foundation Gala last month. Very elegant, very sophisticated. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I had attended that same gala, actually. Meridian had been nominated for a design award. We hadn't won, but the nomination itself had been significant. I hadn't mentioned it to my family because I'd learned that sharing my professional achievements only invited comparisons to Amber's social ones, comparisons in which my accomplishments were inevitably found wanting. The shrimp should form the outer ring, my mother continued, consulting a diagram Amber had apparently drawn. Then the oysters, then the crab clusters in the center. It's very specific. For the next hour, I arranged seafood according to my absent sister's specifications while my mother provided running commentary on Amber's relationship with Daniel Rothman. They had met at a charity auction. He had bid on a weekend at his family's vacation home in Sun River, which Amber had won. They'd started dating 3 weeks later. He proposed at a restaurant in the Pearl District with a ring that had, according to my mother, made every woman in the establishment gasp audibly. Daniel is perfect for her, my mother said, adjusting a cluster of crab for the 4th time. Successful, from an excellent family, established in Portland. Everything your sister deserves. The implication hung unspoken but clear, unlike Natalie, who had moved away, remained unmarried at the advanced age of 32, and pursued a career that, while respectable, lacked the social prestige of marrying into Portland's business aristocracy. I'm happy she's found someone, I said, focusing on the precise placement of lemon wedges. You should be taking notes, my mother replied, echoing my father's earlier sentiment. Amber has always been so good at understanding what matters. Family, community, building a proper life. Not running off to Seattle to draw buildings. I bit back several responses. That my drawings generated 6-figure project fees. That I'd recently been promoted to associate partner at Meridian. That my work had been featured in Architectural Digest last year. That I'd designed a community center in South Seattle that had won a National Sustainability Award. None of these achievements would matter here. In the Hartley family's estimation, I remained the daughter who had inexplicably chosen independence over proximity, career over marriage, personal fulfillment over family approval. The guests began arriving at 6. I had changed into the dress my mother had selected for me, a soft blue cocktail dress that she insisted was appropriate for your role. My role, apparently, was to blend into the background while Amber sparkled at center stage. I greeted relatives I hadn't seen in years, accepted their invasive questions about my dating life with practiced deflection, and watched my sister hold court in the garden, her engagement ring catching the light from the string of Edison bulbs I'd hung. What none of them knew, what I hadn't yet processed myself, was that in exactly 48 hours, I would be sitting across a conference table from Daniel Rothman for an entirely different reason. And the fairy tale engagement they were celebrating tonight would collide spectacularly with the professional reality they'd never bothered to understand. The email arrived on a Tuesday morning while I was reviewing elevation drawings for the Belltown mixed-use project. My phone buzzed with the notification, and I glanced at the sender, Jonathan Wickham, senior partner at Meridian Architecture Group. Conference room in 20. Bring your Cascade District portfolio. The Cascade District project had been my white whale for the past 8 months. A 15-acre redevelopment in downtown Seattle that would combine residential towers, commercial space, retail corridors, and public green spaces. It was the kind of transformative urban project that defined careers, the type of work I'd dreamed about since my first urban planning course at Berkeley. Meridian had been shortlisted along with 2 other firms. We'd submitted preliminary concepts in February, revised proposals in April, and had been waiting since then for the developer's decision. The fact that Jonathan wanted my portfolio suggested movement, though I couldn't tell from his terse message whether the news was good or devastating. I grabbed my presentation materials and headed to the glass-walled conference room overlooking Elliott Bay. Jonathan was already there, along with Patricia Oakes, our managing partner, and Rashid Karimi, who headed our commercial division. The presence of all 3 senior partners made my pulse quicken. "Sit down, Natalie," Patricia said, gesturing to the chair across from them. Her expression was carefully neutral, the practiced poker face she employed during critical negotiations. "We received the developer's decision this morning." I sat, keeping my hands still despite the urge to fidget. 8 months of work, countless late nights, 3 complete redesigns based on community feedback. This project would either validate everything I'd built at Meridian or send me back to designing suburban office parks. Hartwell Commercial Ventures has selected Meridian as the lead architecture firm for the Cascade District redevelopment, Jonathan said, and I felt my chest expand with relief before he continued. "With one significant condition." Patricia leaned forward. "They want you specifically as project lead. Not just senior designer. Full project lead with client-facing authority." The words took a moment to register. Project lead meant being the primary point of contact with the client, presenting to stakeholders, managing the entire design team, and making final decisions on everything from structural systems to finished materials. For a 32-year-old associate partner, this was an unprecedented opportunity. Most architects waited until their 40s to lead projects of this magnitude. "That's incredible," I managed, though my mind was already racing through implications. "What's the timeline?" "Aggressive," Rashid replied. "They want to begin community presentations within 6 weeks. Full design development by end of year. Construction documents by next spring." Jonathan slid a folder across the table. "Here's where it gets complicated. Hartwell is partnering with another development company on this project. They're providing the commercial financing and retail expertise. You'll be working with both client teams." I opened the folder and felt my stomach drop as I read the name of the partner firm. Rothman Development Corporation. "The Rothmans are based in Portland," Patricia was saying, though her voice seemed to come from a distance. "You'll need to coordinate closely with their team. Preliminary meetings start next week. We've already confirmed your attendance at their Portland office on Friday." My mind was spinning. Daniel Rothman. My sister's fiancé. The man whose engagement party I would be attending in less than 72 hours was now, apparently, going to be my client on the most important project of my career. "Natalie?" Jonathan's voice cut through my spiraling thoughts. "This is a good thing. A great thing. Project lead on Cascade District will make you one of the youngest senior partners in the firm's history. Are you on board?" I had approximately 3 seconds to decide whether to mention the personal connection. The professional move would be to disclose it immediately, establish boundaries, potentially recuse myself from client interactions with Daniel specifically while maintaining project leadership. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the memory of my mother's voice saying I was playing architect. Maybe it was years of having my accomplishments dismissed as less important than Amber's social achievements. Maybe it was the simple, burning desire to prove that I had built something real and significant entirely on my own merit. "I'm absolutely on board," I heard myself say. "When do we start?" The rest of the meeting covered logistics. Team assignments, budget parameters, presentation schedules, and the critical community engagement process that would make or break the project's approval. The Cascade District site was in a neighborhood undergoing rapid change, with longtime residents concerned about displacement and gentrification. Our design needed to balance density with affordability, progress with preservation, developer interests with community needs. It was exactly the kind of complex, meaningful work I'd entered architecture to pursue. As I left the conference room, my phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "Don't forget Amber's party is Saturday at 4 p.m. Wear something nice. The Rothmans are attending." The coincidence was almost funny. In the span of one morning, the Rothman family had become both my greatest professional opportunity and an unavoidable collision point with the family dynamics I'd spent a decade trying to navigate from safe distance. I returned to my desk and opened the project folder. The first document was a team roster for Rothman Development's side of the partnership. Daniel Rothman was listed as Vice President of Commercial Development, reporting directly to his father, Lawrence Rothman, who served as CEO. My phone rang. Amber's name flashed on the screen. Nat. Her voice was breathless with excitement. Mom said she told you about the party. I'm so glad you can make it. There are some people I really want you to meet. I'm looking forward to it, I said, which was technically true, though not for the reasons she imagined. Daniel's parents will be there. His whole family, actually. They're wonderful, Nat. So warm and welcoming. His father owns this incredible development company. They're doing projects all over the Northwest. That's impressive, I managed. I know you don't really understand the business world, Amber continued with the casual condescension I'd learned to expect, but the Rothmans are really significant in Portland. Daniel went to Princeton, then worked in New York before joining his father's company. He's brilliant, Nat. And so handsome. You'll see on Saturday. I'm sure he's great, Amber. I just want you to see that success takes many forms, she said, her tone shifting to something that mimicked wisdom. I know you've been focused on your career thing in Seattle, but there's something to be said for building a real life. Family, community, roots. Maybe meeting Daniel will inspire you to think about what really matters. I bit my tongue hard enough to taste copper. My career thing. As if Meridian Architecture Group was an elaborate hobby. As if the Cascade District project sitting open on my screen wasn't the kind of transformative urban design that would impact thousands of lives. I'll see you Saturday, I said, ending the call before I said something that would create conflict before it was strategically necessary. For the next 3 days, I lived in 2 parallel realities. In one, I was the Hartley family's perpetual disappointment, helping to prepare for my younger sister's triumphant engagement party. In the other, I was assembling the team that would design one of Seattle's most significant urban developments, including preparing for Friday's preliminary meeting with the Rothman development team. The cognitive dissonance was staggering. Thursday evening, I drove down to Portland, checking into a hotel near my parents' house. My mother had suggested I stay with them, but I'd learned years ago that maintaining a separate space was essential for preserving what little sanity family visits allowed. Friday morning, I dressed in my standard professional uniform, tailored black pants, crisp white shirt, structured blazer. I pulled my dark hair into a neat bun and applied minimal makeup. This was my armor, the visual representation of competence and authority I'd cultivated over years of being underestimated. The Rothman development offices occupied the top 3 floors of a building in downtown Portland's Pearl District. Glass and steel, expensive but not ostentatious. I checked in with reception and was escorted to a conference room with views of the Willamette River. 3 people were already seated, an older man who I recognized from photos as Lawrence Rothman, a woman who appeared to be in her 50s, and a younger man in his early 30s with sandy hair and sharp blue eyes. Daniel Rothman stood as I entered, extending his hand with a professionally warm smile. You must be from Meridian. Daniel Rothman. Pleasure to meet you. Natalie Carrington, I replied, shaking his hand and maintaining steady eye contact. Lead architect for the Cascade District project. If he recognized my last name, he didn't show it. Why would he? Amber still used her married name from her first marriage, Thornton. Our family connection wouldn't be obvious unless someone specifically made the link. The meeting proceeded with textbook professionalism. We discussed project vision, budget parameters, timeline considerations, and community engagement strategies. Daniel was sharp, asking intelligent questions about sustainable design, pedestrian flow, and mixed-income housing integration. His contributions suggested genuine interest in creating something meaningful rather than just profitable. His father, Lawrence, focused primarily on financial projections and market positioning. The woman, introduced as Catherine Lee, their director of community relations, asked thoughtful questions about our approach to engaging longtime neighborhood residents in the design process. For 90 minutes, I was purely professional. This was my element, discussing design philosophy and urban planning principles with clients who actually understood the complexities involved. Daniel treated me as an equal partner in the development process, not as someone who needed basic concepts explained. As the meeting concluded, Lawrence stood first. Excellent presentation, Ms. Carrington. We're confident Meridian is the right choice for this project. Daniel will be your primary contact on our end. I trust you two will work well together. I'm sure we will, I replied, gathering my materials. My son's engagement party is tomorrow, Lawrence added casually. If you're still in Portland, you'd be welcome to attend. Always good to build relationships with project partners in informal settings. Before I could formulate a polite decline, Daniel interjected. Dad, I'm sure Ms. Carrington has weekend plans. We shouldn't impose. Actually, I heard myself say, I'll already be there. I'm the bride's sister. The conference room went silent. Daniel's expression shifted through several stages: confusion, recognition, and something that might have been concern. You're Amber's sister, he said finally. Natalie, of course. She mentioned you lived in Seattle. I didn't connect. I mean, Amber's last name is Thornton, so I didn't realize. It's from her previous marriage, I said evenly. Small world. Catherine Lee looked between us with barely concealed interest. Lawrence's expression had shifted to something more calculating, as if reassessing the dynamics of what he'd assumed was a straightforward business relationship. Well then, Lawrence said slowly, this is fortuitous. Family and business aligning. That should make collaboration even smoother. I smiled politely, though my instincts were screaming that this alignment was anything but smooth. I should get going. I'll see you tomorrow, Daniel. Both contexts. As I walked back to my car, I felt the two realities beginning to converge in ways I couldn't fully predict. Tomorrow, I would be simultaneously the overlooked sister and the accomplished architect. The family disappointment and the project lead. Invisible and indispensable. What I didn't know yet was exactly how explosively those identities would collide, or that Amber's carefully orchestrated celebration would become the stage for a revelation that would change everything. Saturday morning arrived with deceptive normalcy. I woke in my hotel room to pale sunlight filtering through sheer curtains and the distant sound of traffic on Burnside Street. For a moment, I simply lay there, staring at the ceiling and contemplating the absurdity of my situation. In approximately 6 hours, I would attend my sister's engagement party. The groom would be my new client on the most significant project of my career. My family would have no idea about this professional connection because they'd never bothered to ask specific questions about my work. And I would need to navigate both realities simultaneously while pretending they didn't conflict. I should have disclosed everything yesterday. Called my mother, explained the situation to Amber, established clear boundaries before the party. Instead, I'd maintain strategic silence, telling myself I was waiting for the right moment while knowing I was actually avoiding inevitable confrontation. My phone showed 3 missed calls from my mother and a string of texts in the family group chat. Mother, Natalie, please confirm you'll be here by 3 p.m. to help with final setup. Amber, can't wait for everyone to meet Daniel. This is going to be perfect. Father, weather looks good. I've set up the bar area. Natalie, your mother needs you early. No questions about my week, my work, my life. Just expectations and assignments. The familiar pattern that had defined our relationship for 3 decades. I arrived at my parents' house at 2:45 p.m., dressed in the pale blue cocktail dress my mother had selected. The backyard had been transformed since my last visit. White tent canopies, round tables with cream linens, floral centerpieces in shades of blush and ivory. A string quartet was setting up near the patio. Catering staff moved efficiently through the space, arranging serving stations and bar areas. It looked like a small wedding rather than an engagement party. Nothing my family did was ever understated. Finally, my mother said as I entered through the side gate. She was wearing a rose-colored dress and an expression of frazzled determination. The escort cards need to be arranged on the welcome table. Alphabetically. And someone needs to double-check the champagne order. I specifically requested Veuve Clicquot, but I want to make sure they didn't substitute. Where's Amber? I asked, scanning the organized chaos. Still at the salon with her bridesmaids. They should be here by 4. My mother thrust a box of place cards into my hands. Alphabetically, Natalie. It's not complicated. I spent the next hour arranging names I didn't recognize in precise order on a linen-draped table. Rothman was well represented, Lawrence and Patricia Rothman, Daniel's parents. Mitchell and Caroline Rothman, apparently his brother and sister-in-law. Various aunts, uncles, and cousins. Portland's business elite mixed with old family friends and my parents' country club associates. I found my own name card, table 8, tucked in the back corner with distant cousins I hadn't seen since childhood. Amber's wedding party and close friends occupied the tables nearest the head table. The Rothmans were at table 2, right in the center of everything. The spatial arrangement was its own language, clearly communicating who mattered and who was decorative background. At 3:45 p.m., I was helping arrange champagne flutes when I heard my mother's voice rise an octave with performative delight. Lawrence, Patricia. Welcome. We're so thrilled you could join us. I turned to see Daniel's parents entering the garden. Lawrence wore a tailored suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Patricia was elegant in a champagne-colored dress and understated jewelry that somehow communicated significant wealth. Behind them came an older woman with silver hair and sharp eyes, followed by a younger couple I recognized from the meeting roster as Mitchell and Caroline. And then Daniel appeared, looking uncomfortable in a way that suggested he'd rather be anywhere else. He wore a navy suit and the expression of someone steeling himself for a long evening. His eyes swept the garden, landing briefly on me before moving on without recognition. I felt an unexpected sympathy. He was about to marry into my family, which meant he'd be subjected to decades of the performance I'd been trying to escape. Natalie. My mother's voice cut through my thoughts. Come meet the Rothmans. I set down the champagne flute I'd been holding and walked toward the cluster of adults near the patio. Daniel's eyes tracked my movement, and I watched recognition register across his face. This is our middle daughter, Natalie, my mother was saying. She lives in Seattle. Does something with buildings. The dismissiveness in her tone was casual, reflexive. Something with buildings. As if my entire career could be reduced to a vague hobby. Ms. Carrington, Lawrence said, extending his hand with a knowing smile. We've actually met. Yesterday, in fact. Natalie is the lead architect for the Cascade District project. The silence that followed was profound. My mother's expression cycled through confusion, disbelief, and something that might have been embarrassment. My father, who had wandered over with a drink in hand, looked equally baffled. I'm sorry, my mother said finally. Natalie is what? The lead architect, Patricia Rothman repeated, her tone suggesting she was used to clarifying things for people who didn't quite follow. For the Cascade District redevelopment in Seattle. It's quite a significant project. 15 acres, mixed use, very ambitious. Lawrence and I reviewed the proposal presentations last month. Your daughter's work was exceptional. My mother turned to me, her smile frozen in place. You didn't mention this. It was just confirmed this week, I said evenly. I found out Tuesday. How remarkable, the silver-haired woman said, studying me with interest. I'm Helen Rothman, Daniel's grandmother. I've been following the Cascade District development with interest. The community engagement component is particularly impressive. Using participatory design methods to integrate existing residents' needs rather than displacing them. Very forward-thinking. She'd clearly read the proposal in detail, which was more than I could say for my own parents. Thank you, I replied. Community integration is central to sustainable urban development. Too many projects prioritize profit over people. Natalie draws buildings, my father said, as if this clarified everything. It's nice they're giving her more responsibility. I watched Daniel's expression shift to something between discomfort and second-hand embarrassment. Mitchell Rothman looked like he was trying not to laugh. Helen's eyes narrowed slightly, reassessing the family dynamics with the sharp intelligence of someone who missed nothing. "Gerald, your daughter isn't drawing buildings," Lawrence said with diplomatic patience. "She's leading the architectural design for a $200 million urban development project. It's one of the most significant commercial developments in the Pacific Northwest this decade." The numbers seemed to temporarily short-circuit my father's dismissiveness. My mother's smile had taken on a brittle quality. "Well," she managed. That's wonderful, Natalie. You didn't tell us it was so extensive." "I mentioned I got a promotion," I said quietly. "At dinner last Christmas." "Yes, but you didn't explain it was this significant," my mother countered, as if my failure to adequately brag about my accomplishments was the problem rather than her failure to ask follow-up questions. The conversation was mercifully interrupted by Amber's arrival. She swept into the garden like a bride making an entrance, surrounded by 3 women in matching blush dresses who I vaguely recognized as her college friends. Her dress was white lace, because apparently engagement parties now required bridal attire. "Everyone's here," she exclaimed, her voice carrying across the garden. "Oh my God, this is perfect." She spotted Daniel and rushed toward him, throwing her arms around his neck in a display of affection that seemed calculated for audience impact. He returned the embrace with less enthusiasm, his eyes finding mine over her shoulder with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Daniel, I'm so happy," Amber was saying. "This is everything I dreamed it would be." The guests had begun arriving in earnest now, filling the garden with conversation and the clink of champagne glasses. I retreated to my assigned corner table, watching the performance unfold from safe distance. My Aunt Karen found me first, settling into the chair beside me with a glass of wine and a knowing expression. "Your sister certainly knows how to make an entrance," she observed. "She always has," I agreed neutrally. "And what's this I hear about you designing buildings in Seattle?" Your mother seemed quite surprised. "Lead architect for a major urban development project," I clarified. "But yes, I design buildings." Karen studied me for a moment. She was my mother's younger sister, the one who'd moved to Denver and married an engineer instead of a lawyer. The one who sent me birthday cards with handwritten notes asking about my work. "Your mother has always had a remarkable ability to not see what doesn't fit her narrative," Karen said quietly. "You've done well for yourself, Natalie. Better than well." Before I could respond, my mother's voice rang out across the garden. "Everyone, if I could have your attention. Amber and Daniel would like to say a few words." Amber stood beside Daniel near the head table, her hand possessively on his arm. He looked polished and appropriate, the perfect groom for this perfectly orchestrated event. "Thank you all so much for being here," Amber began, her voice trembling with practiced emotion. "Daniel and I are so grateful to be surrounded by the people we love most." When I met Daniel, I knew immediately that he was everything I'd been looking for. Successful, ambitious, from an amazing family. She turned to beam at the Rothmans. "I can't wait to become part of your family." The way she emphasized successful and amazing family felt pointed, as if she was highlighting everything her own family lacked. My father's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. Daniel took his turn, speaking with considerably less theatrical flair. "I'm looking forward to building a life with Amber," he said simply. "And I appreciate everyone's support as we start this next chapter." The toast was raised, champagne consumed, and the party settled into its programmed rhythm. I made small talk with relatives, deflected questions about my own dating life, and watched my sister work the crowd with the skill of a seasoned politician. At one point, I found myself near the bar at the same time as Mitchell Rothman, Daniel's brother. "So you're the secret architect," he said, flagging down the bartender. Daniel had no idea. This should make Monday's project meeting interesting. "I wasn't keeping it secret," I replied. The connection just never came up. "Families are complicated," Mitchell observed. "Though I have to say, yours has a particularly interesting dynamic. Your mother introduced you as, does something with buildings to a room full of people who know you're leading a $200 million development project. That takes a special kind of willful ignorance." His bluntness was almost refreshing after years of coded passive aggression. She has her narrative, I said carefully. I stopped trying to change it a long time ago. Daniel's good at his job, Mitchell continued. But he tends to compartmentalize. Work is work, personal is personal. This situation is going to force integration he didn't anticipate. I was about to respond when I heard raised voices from the direction of the house. My mother and Amber were standing near the patio doors, clearly in the middle of a disagreement. Even from a distance, I could see the tension in both their postures. Then Amber turned, her eyes scanning the garden until they landed on me. She strode across the lawn with her bridesmaids trailing behind like a defensive formation. "We need to talk," Amber said when she reached me, her voice low but intense. "Now." She grabbed my arm and pulled me toward the side garden, away from the main party. Her grip was tight enough to leave marks. "What the hell, Natalie," she hissed once we were alone. "You're working with Daniel?" "I'm the lead architect on a project his company is partnering on," I said evenly. "It was just confirmed this week." "And you didn't think to mention this? You didn't think maybe I should know that you're going to be working with my fiancé?" "I was waiting for an appropriate moment to discuss it," I replied, which was partially true. "It's a professional relationship. It doesn't affect your engagement." "Everything affects my engagement." Amber's voice was rising now. "Do you have any idea how hard I've worked for this? The Rothmans are one of Portland's most prominent families. I've been so careful, so perfect. And now you're inserting yourself into Daniel's professional life?" "I'm not inserting myself anywhere," I said, feeling my own patience beginning to fray. "I earned this position. The client selected me based on my work." "Your work," Amber repeated mockingly. "God, Natalie, you're so obsessed with proving yourself. You've always been jealous that I'm the successful one, the one people actually want to be around. And now you're trying to ruin my engagement by making it all about you." The accusation was so absurd, so disconnected from reality, that I actually laughed. "I'm jealous of you?" I said. "Amber, I'm leading one of the largest urban development projects in the Pacific Northwest. I have a career I built myself, a reputation in my field, and clients who respect my expertise. I'm not trying to ruin anything. I didn't even know Daniel was your fiancé until after I was assigned to the project." "Liar," Amber spat. "You've always done this. Made everything about yourself. Mom and Dad are supposed to be celebrating my engagement, and instead everyone's talking about your stupid building project." "Maybe if you'd ever asked about my work, you'd know it's not stupid," I replied, my voice hardening. "Maybe if anyone in this family had bothered to take my career seriously, this wouldn't be such a surprise." Amber's face contorted with rage. "You think you're so much better than me. You always have. Moving to Seattle, getting your fancy degree, acting like you're too good for family. But you're not better, Natalie. You're just alone." The words hit harder than I wanted to admit, touching the insecurity I'd carried for years. The question of whether independence and success were worth the isolation they'd required. "At least I earned what I have," I said quietly. "I didn't marry into it." Amber's eyes went wide with fury. "How dare you," she whispered. "How dare you judge my choices?" "I'm not judging your choices," I said. "I'm asking you to respect mine." "Respect?" Amber laughed bitterly. "You want respect? From me? You've spent your entire life making it clear you think you're better than this family. Better than me. And now you want respect?" "I want basic acknowledgement," I replied. "Of who I am and what I've accomplished. But that's apparently too much to ask." Amber stepped closer, her voice dropping to something venomous. "You're pathetic, Natalie. 32 years old, no husband, no kids, nothing but your precious career that no one cares about. You're going to end up alone and bitter, wondering why no one wants to be around you." "At least I'll be alone by choice," I said. "Not because I drove everyone away with jealousy and spite." The slap came so fast I barely registered the movement. Pain exploded across my left cheek, sharp and shocking. I tasted blood where my lip had split against my teeth. The garden went silent. 200 guests, frozen mid-conversation, staring at us. "You've always been jealous of me," Amber said loudly, her voice carrying across the sudden quiet. Her eyes were glistening with tears that appeared on command. "Now you're trying to ruin the most important night of my life." I stood there, one hand touching my split lip, watching her perform for the audience. The victim, the wronged sister, the bride defending her special moment against family sabotage. Then the patio doors opened. Daniel stepped out, his expression confused as he took in the scene. The silent guests. His fiancée with her theatrical tears. Me, with blood on my lip and the mark of her hand blooming across my cheek. His eyes met mine, and I watched recognition dawn. Not just of the situation, but of something deeper. The family dynamic he was marrying into. The sister they dismissed. The professional reality that contradicted everything he'd been told. "Natalie," he said, his voice cutting through the silence. "Ms. Carrington, I mean." The correction was instinctive, professional habit asserting itself. "Hi, boss," he added, and the words fell into the garden like stones into still water. Amber froze, her sob catching in her throat. Her head turned slowly toward Daniel, then back to me, then to Daniel again. "Boss," she repeated, the word barely audible. The silence stretched, broken only by the string quartet's abandoned instruments creaking in the breeze and the distant sound of traffic beyond the garden walls. I touched my split lip again, tasting copper and satisfaction in equal measure. Everything was about to change. The word "boss" hung in the air like smoke after an explosion. I watched the implications ripple across Amber's face, confusion giving way to disbelief, then to something approaching horror as she processed what Daniel had just revealed to 200 witnesses. "What do you mean, boss?" Amber's voice was barely above a whisper, but in the absolute silence of the garden, everyone heard it. Daniel looked between us, clearly realizing his mistake too late. His jaw tightened as he chose his next words carefully. "Natalie is the lead architect on the Cascade District project. The one I've been telling you about. The major Seattle development. The one you said was the most important project of your career?" Amber's voice was rising now, the theatrical tears drying as genuine shock took over. "That project?" "Yes," Daniel said simply. My mother had materialized beside Amber, her face a mask of confusion trying to reorganize itself into appropriate maternal concern. "Surely there's been some misunderstanding. Natalie, you told us you got a promotion, but you didn't say." "I told you I was made project lead on a major urban development," I interrupted, my voice steady despite the blood still trickling from my split lip. "At Christmas dinner. You changed the subject to ask if I'd met anyone worth dating." The memory was specific enough that my mother couldn't deny it. I watched her mouth open and close as she searched for a response that would preserve her narrative. My father had joined the cluster now, drink still in hand, his expression darkening as he processed the scene. "What's going on here? Why is there blood on Natalie's face?" "Amber slapped her," someone said from the crowd. I couldn't identify who, but the murmur that followed suggested multiple witnesses were ready to confirm it. "I'm sure it was just a misunderstanding between sisters," my mother said quickly, her voice taking on the bright, dismissive tone she used to smooth over family conflicts at social gatherings. "You know how siblings can be. Just a little disagreement." "A disagreement?" Helen Rothman's voice cut through my mother's deflection like a scalpel. Daniel's grandmother had moved closer to our group, her sharp eyes taking in every detail. "Diane, your daughter assaulted her sister at a party with 200 witnesses. That's not a disagreement. That's assault." "Now, let's not be dramatic," my mother began. "I'm being precise," Helen interrupted coldly. "There's a difference." Lawrence Rothman had joined his mother, his expression unreadable as he assessed the situation. Patricia stood beside him, her earlier warmth replaced by careful neutrality. Mitchell watched from a few steps back, his expression suggesting he was equal parts horrified and fascinated by the unfolding disaster. Perhaps we should move this conversation somewhere more private, Lawrence suggested, his tone making it clear this wasn't really a suggestion. There's nothing to discuss privately, Amber said, her voice regaining some of its earlier venom. Natalie has been lying to everyone. Pretending she didn't know about my engagement, inserting herself into Daniel's work. I wasn't pretending anything, I said, finally finding my voice again. I didn't know Daniel was your fiancé when I was assigned to the project. I found out Tuesday. Your engagement party was Saturday. There were exactly 4 days between those events, and I saw you for approximately 3 hours of setup yesterday, during which you talked exclusively about table arrangements and your hair appointment. You should have told me immediately, Amber insisted. I planned to, I replied. At an appropriate time. Not while arranging shrimp in spiral patterns according to your diagram. A few scattered laughs rippled through the crowd before being quickly suppressed. Daniel cleared his throat. I think there's been a fundamental miscommunication. Amber, you told me your sister did something with architecture in Seattle. You never mentioned she was a lead architect, or gave me her full name. I knew her as Natalie Carrington from Meridian Architecture Group. You're Amber Thornton. The connection wasn't obvious. Because I use my married name, Amber said, as if this explained everything. Right, Daniel agreed. So when I met Natalie at our project meeting yesterday, I had no idea she was your sister. She introduced herself professionally, we discussed the project, and that was it. She didn't mention the family connection either, probably for the same reason I didn't. It wasn't obvious. She knew, Amber insisted, her voice taking on a desperate edge. She had to know. You told me about the Cascade District project weeks ago. You told me there was a project, I corrected. You said Daniel worked in commercial development. You didn't mention which project, which company, or any specific details. You talked about his Princeton education and his family's vacation home. You never once discussed the actual work. The distinction was damning. I watched my mother's expression flicker as she recognized the truth in what I was saying. Amber had never bothered to learn the specifics of Daniel's work, just as she'd never bothered to learn the specifics of mine. This is ridiculous, my father interjected, his voice carrying the authority he still believed he possessed. Natalie, you should have disclosed this potential conflict immediately. It's inappropriate to work with your sister's fiancé. It's not inappropriate, Lawrence Rothman said firmly. It's business. Natalie was selected for the project based on her firm's proposal and her qualifications. The personal connection is incidental. Unless someone believes there's an actual conflict of interest that would compromise the project? He posed it as a question, but his tone made clear what answer he expected. The silence stretched uncomfortably. Of course not, my father said finally, backtracking. I just meant. You meant that Natalie should have prioritized avoiding family awkwardness over her professional responsibilities, Helen Rothman said, her voice like ice. Which is exactly the kind of thinking that keeps women from advancing in their careers. Prioritizing everyone else's comfort over their own opportunities. My mother's face flushed. I don't think that's fair. Fair? Helen's eyebrows rose. Your daughter just physically assaulted her sister in front of 200 people, and you're worried about fairness? Let me be clear, if this were my family, Amber would be apologizing immediately and profusely. Instead, she's making excuses and blaming Natalie for not managing everyone else's emotions adequately. Grandmother, Daniel said quietly, though he didn't sound like he disagreed. Don't grandmother me, Helen replied. I've watched this dynamic for the past hour. Natalie seated at the back table like an afterthought. Her mother dismissing her career as something with buildings. Her sister's entire speech emphasizing material success as if that's the only achievement that matters. And now physical violence when Natalie's actual accomplishments threaten the family hierarchy. The assessment was brutal and accurate. I felt simultaneously vindicated and exposed. Having someone outside the family articulate what I'd experienced for years was both validating and deeply uncomfortable. Mrs. Rothman, I appreciate your concern, I said carefully, but this is a family matter. It stopped being solely a family matter when my grandson became involved, Helen interrupted. Daniel is about to marry into this dynamic. That makes it my business. Amber made a sound that was half sob, half protest. This is my engagement party. This was supposed to be perfect. And Natalie ruined it. Like she ruins everything. I didn't ruin anything, I said, exhaustion replacing anger. I showed up when requested, helped with setup, and tried to stay out of the way. You decided to assault me because you couldn't handle the fact that I have professional accomplishments you weren't aware of. Because you never tell us anything. Amber shot back. You moved to Seattle and act like you're too good for this family. You never share what's happening in your life. I share, I replied quietly. You don't listen. There's a difference. My Aunt Karen appeared at my elbow with a cloth napkin and ice. For your lip, she said softly. It's still bleeding. I took it gratefully, pressing it against the cut. The cold was grounding, pulling me back from the emotional intensity threatening to overwhelm my composure. I think, Lawrence Rothman said into the strained silence, that this party has run its course. Daniel, perhaps you and Amber should take some time to discuss things privately. Natalie, I'd appreciate if you could stop by our hotel tomorrow morning. We should talk about how to handle the professional relationship going forward, given these circumstances. It was a diplomatic exit strategy, giving everyone permission to leave without admitting complete disaster. Of course, I agreed. What time? 10 o'clock? We're at the Heathman. I nodded, then turned to my mother. I'm going to leave now. Thank you for inviting me. The formality was intentional, creating distance through politeness. Natalie, wait, my mother began, but I was already walking toward the side gate, my Aunt Karen falling into step beside me. Behind us, I could hear Amber's voice rising again, my mother attempting damage control, and the murmur of 200 guests processing the most dramatic engagement party in recent Portland social history. Karen walked me to my car, parked 2 blocks away to avoid the valet service my mother had insisted on. Are you okay? She asked as I unlocked the door. Honestly? I don't know, I admitted. That was worse than I anticipated. Your sister has always been threatened by you, Karen said quietly. Even when you were kids. You were smarter, more creative, more independent. She compensated by being more conventionally successful, prettier, more popular, better at playing the game your mother valued. But she's always known, on some level, that your path was harder and more authentic. That's generous, I said. She just slapped me in front of her entire engagement party. People lash out when their narratives collapse, Karen observed. Amber's entire identity is built on being the successful daughter, the one who did everything right. Having concrete evidence that you've achieved something she can't diminish or dismiss threatens her entire self-concept. I pressed the ice-wrapped napkin against my lip again, wincing at the pressure. I didn't want to threaten anything. I just wanted basic respect. I know, Karen said. And that's exactly why this happened. You stopped accepting their narrative about who you are. That's terrifying for people who need you to stay small so they can feel big. I climbed into my car, suddenly exhausted beyond measure. Thanks for being here, Aunt Karen. Always, she said. Call me if you need anything. And Natalie? What that Rothman grandmother said was right. You didn't ruin anything. You just stopped participating in your own diminishment. As I drove back to my hotel through the gathering dusk, I replayed the confrontation in fragments. Amber's hand connecting with my face. The shocked silence of 200 guests. Daniel's involuntary, "Hi, boss," that had detonated the carefully constructed fiction of my family's understanding. My phone buzzed continuously with texts, but I ignored them. There would be time enough tomorrow to deal with the aftermath. Right now, I needed to process what had just happened. Not just the slap, but the complete collapse of the careful compartmentalization I'd maintained for years. My professional life and family life had been separate spheres, allowing me to succeed in one without the other's interference. That separation was gone now. Daniel knew exactly what family he was marrying into. The Rothmans had witnessed the dynamic firsthand. My parents could no longer maintain comfortable ignorance about what I actually did for a living. And I had a decision to make about how to move forward professionally with a client who was engaged to the sister who'd just assaulted me at her engagement party. The absurdity of the situation would have been funny if my lip wasn't still bleeding. Back at my hotel, I cleaned the cut properly and changed into comfortable clothes. My phone showed 17 missed calls and 43 text messages. I scrolled through them with detached interest. My mother, we need to talk about what happened. This is unacceptable. Amber, you've always been jealous of me. Tonight proved it. My father, your behavior tonight was embarrassing. Call me. The entitlement in their messages was staggering. I had been assaulted, and they were framing me as the problem. There was one message from Daniel, I'm sorry about tonight. We should talk before the meeting with my father tomorrow. I'll be at the Heathman lobby at 9:30 if you can meet earlier. And one from Helen Rothman, my dear, you handled that situation with remarkable grace. I hope your injury isn't serious. If you need anything, please don't hesitate to reach out. I responded only to Helen, thanking her for her kindness. Then I turned my phone to silent and stared at the ceiling, trying to understand what came next. The professional complications were significant but manageable. The personal ones were a chasm I wasn't sure could be bridged. What I knew with absolute certainty was that I would not apologize for existing, for succeeding, or for refusing to minimize my accomplishments to preserve their comfortable fictions. Tomorrow I would face the professional reckoning. Tonight, I would simply rest and let my split lip heal. The confrontation I'd been avoiding for years had finally happened. And somehow, despite the blood and humiliation and family implosion, I felt lighter than I had in a decade. The truth, however brutal its delivery, was finally out in the open. Now we would all have to live with the consequences. I woke Sunday morning to pale light filtering through hotel curtains and the dull throb of my split lip. For a moment, I lay still, hoping the previous evening had been some kind of stress-induced nightmare. Then I shifted and felt the tender swelling along my cheekbone where Amber's hand had connected. Not a nightmare. Just reality asserting itself with unusual drama. My phone showed it was 7:30 a.m. I had 2 hours before meeting Daniel in the Heathman lobby, 3 hours before the formal meeting with Lawrence Rothman. Enough time to make myself presentable and formulate some kind of strategy for salvaging the professional relationship that had been spectacularly complicated by family dysfunction. I showered carefully, avoiding the cut on my lip, and assessed the damage in the bathroom mirror. The split wasn't as bad as it had felt last night, a clean break that would heal quickly. The bruising along my cheekbone was more visible, a shadow of purple-green that makeup would only partially conceal. Physical evidence of what had happened, impossible to completely hide. Good, some vindictive part of me thought. Let them see exactly what Amber did. I dressed in professional attire, charcoal gray pants, white blouse, navy blazer, the armor of competence I'd learned to wear in situations where my authority might be questioned. Then I applied minimal makeup, enough to look polished but not enough to hide the bruise entirely. At 9:15, I checked out of the hotel and drove to the Heathman, a historic hotel in downtown Portland that radiated understated luxury. The kind of place where business deals were negotiated over expensive scotch and discretion was considered a premium service. Daniel was waiting in the lobby when I arrived at 9:25, sitting in a leather chair near the fireplace with a coffee cup in hand. He stood as I approached, his expression carefully neutral but his eyes immediately tracking to the visible bruise on my face. "Thank you for meeting early," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. "Can I get you coffee? Something to eat?" "Coffee would be good," I admitted, settling into the chair. He signaled a server and ordered for both of us, then leaned back with a heavy exhale. "I owe you an apology for last night." "Multiple apologies, actually." "For what specifically?" I asked, genuinely curious which aspect he felt most culpable for. "For not making the family connection sooner. For putting you in an impossible position. For that entire disaster of an evening." He ran a hand through his hair, disrupting its usual polish. "I should have asked Amber more specific questions about her family. I should have. I don't know. Something. You couldn't have known, I said, surprised to find I meant it. Amber uses her married name. She never mentioned specifics about my work. You had no reason to connect Natalie Carrington from Meridian Architecture with Amber Thornton's sister who does something with buildings in Seattle. Daniel winced at the phrase. Your mother actually said that. In front of Lawrence and my grandmother. I couldn't believe it. Believe it, I replied, accepting the coffee the server brought. That's been the consistent response to my career for the past decade. Vague acknowledgement followed by subject changes to more important topics, usually Amber's social achievements or my brother's adventure tourism business. That's. He searched for the right word. Profoundly dismissive. Yes, I agreed simply. It is. We sat in silence for a moment, sipping coffee and navigating the awkwardness of our suddenly complicated professional relationship. I need to know if you want me off the project, I said finally, deciding directness was the only viable approach. I'm prepared to recommend another lead architect from Meridian if you think the family connection creates too much conflict. Daniel looked genuinely surprised. Why would I want you off the project? You're the best architect for the job. That hasn't changed. My sister just slapped me at your engagement party in front of 200 people, including your entire family, I pointed out. That's not exactly conducive to smooth professional collaboration. No, he admitted. It's not. But it's also not your fault, and it doesn't change your qualifications or the quality of your work. If anything, last night clarified some things I should have recognized sooner. Such as? He hesitated, clearly weighing how honest to be. Such as the fact that Amber has never asked detailed questions about my work. She knows I'm in commercial development, that I work for my father's company, that we do large-scale projects. But she's never asked about specific methodologies, community engagement strategies, or design philosophies. The things you'd think someone genuinely interested in their partner's career would want to understand. She asked about the financial scale, I guessed. The prominence of the projects. The networking opportunities. Exactly, Daniel confirmed. Which is fine, not everyone needs to understand the technical aspects of their partner's work. But it means she genuinely had no framework for understanding that you were leading the Cascade District project. In her mind, you draw buildings. I do important development work. Those aren't connected in any meaningful way. The assessment was accurate and depressing. Are you reconsidering the engagement? I'm reconsidering a lot of things, he said carefully. But that conversation needs to happen with Amber, not with you. What I need to know right now is whether you're comfortable continuing as project lead given these circumstances. I considered the question seriously. The project was career-defining work, exactly the kind of transformative urban design I'd entered architecture to pursue. Walking away would be professional self-sabotage based on family dysfunction I hadn't created and couldn't control. I'm comfortable continuing, I said. As long as we can maintain clear professional boundaries and you understand that my relationship with my family is complicated at best. Understood, Daniel agreed. And for what it's worth, my grandmother was serious about what she said last night. If you need any support dealing with family fallout, the Rothman family has resources and connections. We don't tolerate that kind of behavior. Your grandmother is formidable, I observed. That's putting it mildly, Daniel said with a slight smile. She built half of Rothman Development's early reputation through sheer force of will and strategic networking. She doesn't suffer fools, and she has very strong opinions about family dynamics that undermine individual achievement. I got that impression. She also has strong opinions about women in professional fields being undermined by family expectations, he continued. She's been fighting that battle for 40 years. Watching your mother dismiss your work last night triggered every protective instinct she has. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed with an incoming call. My mother's name flashed on the screen. I declined it. Have you talked to your family since last night? Daniel asked. No, I admitted. I'm not ready for that conversation yet. They've sent texts blaming me for ruining the party and demanding I apologize to Amber. I'm not inclined to engage with that narrative. You're not going to apologize? Daniel's tone was neutral, genuinely curious rather than judgmental. For what? I asked. For existing? For having a successful career they chose not to learn about? For not psychically predicting that my professional work would intersect with Amber's engagement? None of those things require apology. Your sister did assault you, Daniel pointed out quietly. That seems like something that warrants apology from her, not you. You'd think so, I agreed. But that's not how dynamics work in my family. Amber's emotions are treated as valid responses to situations. Mine are treated as problems to be managed. It's been that way since childhood. Daniel's expression suggested he was rapidly reassessing everything he thought he knew about his fiancé's family. Good. Better he understood the reality before making permanent commitments. At 9:55, we headed upstairs to the suite Lawrence Rothman had reserved for the meeting. Helen answered the door, her sharp eyes immediately cataloging my bruised face with undisguised disapproval. Good morning, Natalie, she said warmly. How are you feeling? I'm fine, thank you, I replied. It looks worse than it is. It looks like assault, Helen said bluntly. Which is exactly what it was. Lawrence and Patricia were waiting in the suite sitting area, both dressed casually but expensively. They stood as we entered, and I noticed Patricia's gaze also immediately tracking to my face. Please, sit, Lawrence said, gesturing to the available chairs. Can we get you anything? Coffee, tea, water? I'm fine, thank you, I said, settling into a wingback chair. Once we were all seated, Lawrence leaned forward with his hands clasped. First, let me say that what happened last night was completely unacceptable. You were assaulted at what should have been a celebratory family event, and I want you to know that the Rothman family does not condone or excuse that behavior regardless of the circumstances. I appreciate that, I said carefully. Second, Lawrence continued, I want to clarify that your position on the Cascade District project is secure. Your qualifications and your firm's proposal earned you that position. Family complications don't change the professional reality. However, Helen interjected, we need to discuss how to manage this situation moving forward. Daniel is engaged to your sister. You're leading a project he's closely involved with. Those relationships will intersect repeatedly over the next 18 months. I understand, I said. I'm prepared to maintain strict professional boundaries and ensure that personal dynamics don't impact the project. That's a good starting point, Patricia said. But we need to be realistic. Your family now knows about the professional connection. They've witnessed the Rothman family's response to last night's incident. There will be ongoing tension that affects everyone involved. Are you asking me to resign from the project? I asked directly. Absolutely not, Lawrence said firmly. We're asking how to best support you in maintaining your professional role while navigating complicated family dynamics. The question caught me off guard. I'd expected discussion of boundaries and protocols, not offers of support. I'm not sure what kind of support you're referring to, I admitted. Helen leaned forward. Natalie, my dear, you're in an impossible position through no fault of your own. You've earned professional success that your family has systematically dismissed. Now that success has collided with your sister's social achievements in a way that threatens her self-perception. She responded violently. Your parents are demanding you apologize for being assaulted. Meanwhile, you need to maintain professional authority on a major project while managing family fallout. The summary was brutally accurate. We're not asking you to choose between your career and your family, Patricia added. But we are offering resources if you need them. Legal support if your sister's assault becomes a larger issue. Professional mediation if family tensions start impacting the project. Even personal counseling resources if you need help processing the situation. I felt an unexpected tightness in my throat. These people, who I'd known for less than a week, were offering more practical support than my family had provided in years. That's very generous, I managed. I'll let you know if I need assistance. There's one more thing we need to discuss, Lawrence said, his tone shifting to something more delicate. Daniel's engagement to Amber. I glanced at Daniel, who looked distinctly uncomfortable. Last night raised significant concerns, Lawrence continued carefully. About family dynamics, communication patterns, and long-term compatibility. Those concerns need to be addressed before moving forward with wedding plans. That's between Daniel and Amber, I said firmly. I'm not going to interfere with their relationship. You're not interfering, Helen said. We're simply acknowledging that the incident revealed information about your family that Daniel should have learned earlier. Information that's relevant to the commitment he's making. Daniel shifted in his seat. Grandmother is right. I need to have serious conversations with Amber about expectations, family dynamics, and how we handle conflict. Last night demonstrated that we haven't done that adequately. But those conversations don't involve me, I insisted. I'm not a factor in your relationship assessment. You're not a factor, Patricia agreed. But the way Amber treated you, and the way your parents responded, are absolutely factors. They reveal patterns of behavior that will affect Daniel if he marries into your family. The logic was sound, but accepting it felt like betraying Amber somehow. Despite everything, she was still my sister. I don't want to be the reason the engagement falls apart, I said quietly. You won't be, Daniel said firmly. If the engagement ends, it will be because of fundamental incompatibilities that already existed. Last night just made them impossible to ignore. We spent the next hour discussing project logistics, establishing communication protocols, and outlining professional boundaries. By the time the meeting concluded, we had a clear framework for moving forward that acknowledged the complicated personal dynamics while protecting the professional work. As I prepared to leave, Helen walked me to the door. Natalie, she said quietly, I want you to understand something. What happened last night wasn't your fault. Not the assault, not the family conflict, not the professional complications. You've spent years making yourself smaller to accommodate people who will never appreciate your sacrifices. That ends now. I don't know how to make it end, I admitted. They're still my family. Family isn't an excuse for abuse, Helen said firmly. And yes, what your sister did was abuse. What your parents are doing by demanding you apologize is enabling that abuse. You deserve better, whether or not they're capable of providing it. Her words stayed with me as I drove back towards Seattle, leaving Portland and its complicated family dynamics in my rearview mirror. My phone continued buzzing with messages I continued ignoring. The professional situation was stable. The personal situation was a disaster. And somewhere between those two realities, I needed to figure out how to move forward without sacrificing the career I'd built or accepting treatment I didn't deserve. What I didn't know yet was that the consequences of that engagement party were just beginning to unfold, and that the next 6 months would force everyone involved to confront truths we'd all been avoiding for very different reasons. The foundation had cracked. Now we'd discover what remained standing when everything finally settled. Monday morning, I returned to Meridian's Seattle office with a split lip, a fading bruise, and a determination to focus exclusively on the work that had earned me this position in the first place. The partners had been briefed on the situation. Professional courtesy demanded transparency about potential complications with client relationships, but I'd kept the details minimal. Family conflict at an engagement party. Physical altercation. All parties aware and choosing to move forward professionally. Jonathan Wickham stopped by my desk before the morning team meeting, his expression carefully neutral in the way that suggested he knew more than he was saying. Everything manageable with the Portland situation? He asked. Completely manageable, I replied, pulling up the design files I'd been refining over the weekend. Working had been the only thing that kept me from obsessively replaying Saturday's disaster. The Rothmans confirmed their commitment to the project. We're moving forward as planned. Good, Jonathan said, though his eyes tracked briefly to the fading bruise on my cheekbone before he looked away. The community engagement sessions start next week. Are you prepared to present? I'm always prepared to present, I said, and meant it. This was the part of architecture I loved most, translating complex design concepts into accessible language, engaging with communities who would actually live with the results of our work. The Cascade District project wasn't just about creating profitable real estate. It was about urban revitalization that preserved community rather than destroying it. The morning meeting brought together the full Cascade District team, 8 architects, 3 structural engineers, 2 sustainability consultants, and our community liaison, Marcus Chin. I'd specifically requested Marcus for this project because of his background in participatory design, the methodology that treated community members as collaborators rather than subjects. We have 6 community presentation sessions scheduled over the next 3 weeks, I began, pulling up the calendar on the conference room screen. 3 in the Cascade District neighborhood itself, 2 at the Central Library, and 1 virtual session for residents who can't attend in person. Our objective isn't to sell the design. It's to listen, learn, and adapt. That's a significant departure from standard developer approach, noted Sarah Okoye, one of our senior architects. Most clients want us to present a polished vision and defend it against objections. Most clients aren't partnering with Hartwell and Rothman on this particular project, I replied. They've explicitly requested community-centered design. Our job is to deliver on that promise authentically, not just performatively. We spent 2 hours reviewing preliminary designs, identifying elements that needed community input, and developing presentation materials that invited dialogue rather than imposing solutions. By the time the meeting concluded, I felt anchored again in the professional competence that had earned me this position. My phone had been on silent throughout the meeting. When I checked it afterward, I found 23 new messages. Most from my mother, several from my father, a few from Amber. I scrolled through them with detached interest, noting the escalating tone. Mother, we need to discuss Saturday's incident. Your behavior was unacceptable. Father, call me immediately. This situation reflects poorly on the entire family. Amber, everyone is talking about what you did. You embarrassed me in front of Daniel's entire family. The gaslighting was almost impressive in its audacity. I had been assaulted, and somehow I was being blamed for the embarrassment my assault had caused. There was one message from my brother Trevor. Mom called me 3 times yesterday demanding I talk sense into you. I told her you're the only one in this family who consistently makes sense. Stay strong. His support, however distant and minimal, felt disproportionately meaningful. I drafted a single response to the family group chat. I will not be apologizing for being assaulted. When you're ready to acknowledge what actually happened on Saturday, we can have a conversation. Until then, I need space to focus on my work. Then I muted the conversation and returned to design specifications. The following week brought the first community engagement session in the Cascade District neighborhood. The venue was a community center that had seen better days. Worn linoleum floors, folding chairs arranged in semicircles, fluorescent lighting that buzzed with electrical fatigue. About 40 residents attended, their ages ranging from elderly longtime residents to young families recently priced into the neighborhood by Seattle's housing crisis. I'd dressed carefully for this presentation, professional but approachable, expensive but not ostentatious. The goal was to communicate competence without creating distance, authority without condescension. Good evening, everyone, I began as the room settled. My name is Natalie Carrington. I'm the lead architect for the Cascade District redevelopment project. I want to start by being very clear about why we're here tonight. We're not here to convince you that our design is perfect. We're here to listen to your concerns, understand your needs, and incorporate your knowledge of this neighborhood into plans that will affect your lives for decades to come. A murmur rippled through the audience, surprise, perhaps, that a developer-sponsored architect was leading with humility rather than sales pitch. This neighborhood has history, I continued. Some of you have lived here for 30, 40, 50 years. You've watched it change, for better and worse. That institutional knowledge is invaluable. You know which corners flood during heavy rain. You know where kids gather after school. You know which buildings are community anchors and which are eyesores everyone tolerates. We need that knowledge to design something that works with the neighborhood's reality, not against it. An elderly black woman in the 3rd row raised her hand. That's a nice speech, but every developer says they care about community input. Then they build luxury condos that price out everyone who actually lives here. Why should we believe you're different? You shouldn't, I said bluntly, and watched surprise register across multiple faces. Not based on promises. You should judge us based on specific commitments written into the development agreement. Mixed income housing with guaranteed affordable units. Ground floor retail reserved for local businesses at below market rates. Public green space accessible to everyone, not just residents of new buildings. Community benefit agreements with enforcement mechanisms. Can you guarantee those commitments? Another resident asked. I can guarantee they're in our proposal, I replied. Whether they make it into the final development agreement depends partly on community advocacy. That's why your participation in this process matters. The more organized and vocal the community is about specific needs, the stronger our position is when negotiating with city planning and financing partners. For the next 90 minutes, we presented preliminary designs and listened to feedback. The concerns were practical and specific: parking impacts on residential streets, construction noise mitigation, preservation of the community garden on the southeast corner of the development site, accessible transit connections, childcare facilities for working families. Marcus Chen documented everything methodically, creating a prioritized list of community requirements that would inform our design revisions. This was architecture as it should be practiced, collaborative problem solving rather than imposed solutions. As the session ended and residents began filtering out, several approached me directly with additional thoughts. An older man wanted to talk about the neighborhood's history as a jazz district in the 1960s, suggesting we incorporate that cultural heritage into public art installations. A young mother asked about playground design that accommodated children with different abilities. A small business owner wanted details about the ground floor retail commitment. I listened to each person, took notes, exchanged contact information, and felt the satisfaction that came from doing work that actually mattered to real people with real needs. The satisfaction lasted until I reached my car and found 3 missed calls from Daniel Rothman. I returned the call as I drove back toward my apartment. He answered on the first ring. Natalie, thanks for calling back, he said, his voice tight with controlled stress. We need to talk about the project timeline. What's the problem? My father wants to accelerate the community engagement process. Compress 6 weeks of sessions into 3 weeks so we can move to design development faster. I felt my jaw tighten. That defeats the entire purpose of community engagement. We need time between sessions to incorporate feedback, revise designs, and demonstrate that we're actually listening. Rushing the process looks exactly like performative consultation. I agree, Daniel said. But Lawrence is under pressure from Hartwell Commercial to show faster progress. They're concerned about financing timelines and market conditions. Then Lawrence needs to explain to Hartwell that cutting corners on community engagement risks derailing the entire project, I replied, my frustration sharpening my tone. We can move fast or we can move right. We can't do both. I've made that argument, Daniel said wearily. He's not convinced. He wants you at a meeting Wednesday morning to discuss revised timelines. Fine, I agreed. I'll be there. But I'm not compromising the community engagement process to satisfy arbitrary financial deadlines. That's non-negotiable. There was a pause on the other end of the line. You're really not afraid to push back, are you? Against bad decisions that will undermine the project? No, I'm not afraid, I said. That's literally my job. If your father hired me to just agree with everything and implement whatever he wants, he hired the wrong architect. He didn't hire you to agree with everything, Daniel said. But he's used to people being more diplomatic in their disagreement. I can be diplomatic, I replied. But I won't compromise professional standards to manage someone's ego. If that's a problem, tell me now. Another pause. It's not a problem. Actually, it's refreshing. Most people are too worried about keeping clients happy to tell them when they're making mistakes. Keeping clients happy is easy, I said. Keeping clients from making expensive mistakes that damage community trust and project viability is harder but more valuable. That's what you're paying me for. After we ended the call, I sat in my parked car outside my apartment building and acknowledged what was becoming increasingly clear. I was done shrinking myself to accommodate other people's comfort. Not just with my family, but professionally, socially, in every dimension of my life. The split lip had healed. The bruise was fading. But something fundamental had shifted that night at Amber's engagement party. A willingness to accept diminishment for the sake of peace had been replaced by a stubborn insistence on being seen accurately, even when that accuracy created conflict. Wednesday's meeting with Lawrence Rothman was exactly as contentious as I'd anticipated. He presented a revised timeline that compressed community engagement by 40%. I presented data on failed urban development projects that had rushed community consultation and faced years of legal challenges, community opposition, and implementation disasters. "You're asking me to prioritize short-term financial efficiency over long-term project success," I said directly. "That's bad business and worse community relations." Lawrence's expression suggested he wasn't accustomed to being contradicted quite so bluntly. "Ms. Carrington, I appreciate your commitment to process, but we have financial realities to consider. Investors want to see progress. Then show them progress in the form of genuine community buy-in," I countered. "The fastest way to derail this project is to lose community support. That triggers appeals, legal challenges, and political opposition that costs infinitely more time and money than an extra 3 weeks of engagement sessions." "She's right," Helen Rothman's voice cut through the tension. I hadn't realized she was sitting quietly in the corner of the conference room. "Lawrence, you're reacting to Hartwell's pressure rather than thinking strategically. Natalie is protecting the project's long-term viability. Listen to her." The intervention from his mother shifted the dynamic immediately. Lawrence's defensive posture softened into something more reflective. "How much time do you absolutely need?" he asked me finally. "The original 6 weeks," I said. "With flexibility for additional sessions if specific concerns emerge that require deeper consultation. Community engagement isn't a checkbox to complete. It's an ongoing relationship that protects everyone's interests." Lawrence considered this, then nodded slowly. "All right. Original timeline stands. But I need regular updates demonstrating progress and community response. Can you provide that?" "Absolutely," I agreed. As the meeting concluded and I gathered my materials, Helen approached me with an approving expression. "Well handled," she said quietly. Lawrence needed to hear that from someone he couldn't dismiss or intimidate. Most architects would have accommodated his demands to avoid conflict. "Most architects don't have recent experience being literally slapped for existing inconveniently," I replied. "My tolerance for accepting unreasonable demands has diminished significantly." Helen laughed, a sharp sound of genuine amusement. "Good. Maintain that boundary. The project will be better for it, and frankly, so will you." Over the following weeks, the community engagement sessions continued with encouraging results. Attendance grew as word spread that we were genuinely incorporating feedback. Residents began bringing specific proposals: a community kitchen in one of the ground floor spaces, a roof garden with native plants, public art installations featuring neighborhood history. Our designs evolved substantially through this process, becoming richer and more contextually responsive than the initial concepts. This was what architecture could be when done right: collaborative creation rather than imposed vision. Meanwhile, my family's messages had shifted from demanding apologies to wounded silence punctuated by occasional guilt trips. Amber sent a single text: "Daniel is distant. This is your fault." I didn't respond. My mother tried a different approach: "Your Aunt Karen says you're doing well. I'm glad you're happy with your choices." The passive aggression was almost artful. Trevor sent occasional supportive messages that kept me grounded: "You're doing the right thing. Don't let them gaslight you." 3 months into the project, as preliminary designs were being finalized based on community input, I received an unexpected call from Daniel. His voice carried a weight I hadn't heard before. "I need to tell you something," he began. "Amber and I have postponed the wedding." I pulled over to the side of the road, unable to process this information while driving. "Postponed or cancelled?" "Technically postponed," Daniel said. "Realistically?" "I don't know. We've been in couples counseling for 6 weeks. The therapist suggested we need more time to address fundamental communication issues before making permanent commitments." I'm sorry, I said, meaning it despite everything. Don't be, Daniel replied. You were right about a lot of things. Not intentionally, but accurately. Amber and I don't actually know each other very well. We know the versions of ourselves we perform for each other, but not the reality underneath. That's not a foundation for marriage. What triggered the counseling? I asked. Honestly? The way she talked about you, Daniel said. After that night, I started paying attention to how she discussed her family, her career, her goals. Everything was framed in terms of status and comparison. She wasn't happy about our engagement because she loved me. She was happy because I represented success in the narrative she'd constructed about her life. The assessment was harsh but probably accurate. I'm not trying to insert myself into your relationship, I said carefully. Whatever you decide should be based on what's right for you, not on family dynamics with me. I know, Daniel agreed. But I can't ignore what I've learned. About Amber, about your family, about myself. I don't want a marriage built on performance and status anxiety. I want something real. And I'm not sure Amber knows how to have that conversation. After we ended the call, I sat in my car watching rain streak down the windshield and feeling the complex weight of validation mixed with sadness. I hadn't wanted to damage my sister's engagement. But I also couldn't deny that the truth emerging was probably saving Daniel from a marriage that would have made both of them miserable. The project continued moving forward. Community approval was secured. Design development accelerated. And I found myself building something substantial, not just the Cascade District development, but a professional reputation for principled collaboration and uncompromising standards. What I didn't yet understand was that the final confrontation with my family was still coming, and that it would require reconciling not just my professional success with their expectations, but my own understanding of what family could and should mean when the traditional structure had proven unsustainable. The foundation was solid. The structure was rising. Soon we'd discover whether the relationships that had defined my first 3 decades could be renovated or needed to be rebuilt entirely from scratch. 6 months after the engagement party, the Cascade District project had transformed from preliminary concepts into detailed construction documents ready for permit review. Our community engagement process had generated genuine enthusiasm among residents, resulting in design features that reflected actual neighborhood needs rather than developer assumptions. Local media coverage had been overwhelmingly positive, highlighting the project as a model for inclusive urban development. I had also been promoted to senior partner at Meridian Architecture Group, the youngest person to achieve that position in the firm's 30-year history. The promotion came with equity stake, substantial salary increase, and authority over project selection and team leadership. It was everything I'd worked toward since graduate school. Yet standing in my Seattle apartment on a gray November morning, staring at the formal invitation in my hands, I felt none of the triumph these achievements should have generated. The invitation was for Thanksgiving dinner at my parents' house in Millbrook Heights. My mother's handwriting on the enclosed note was careful, almost formal. We would like you to join us for Thanksgiving. It's been too long since we've all been together as a family. Please consider attending. We have things we need to discuss. I hadn't spoken to my parents since that text message 6 months ago stating I wouldn't apologize for being assaulted. My mother had tried calling twice in the intervening months. My father had sent a single email suggesting I was overreacting to a family disagreement. Amber had maintained complete silence except for a brief text blaming me when her wedding postponement became a cancellation. Trevor had kept me loosely informed of family dynamics through occasional texts. Mom's been talking about you at Bridge Club. Says you're too focused on work to maintain family relationships. Dad just grunts and changes the subject whenever your name comes up. Amber moved back home after the engagement ended. It's uncomfortable for everyone. Now they wanted to discuss things. I suspected discuss meant convince me to apologize and restore their preferred family narrative. The question was whether I was willing to engage with that conversation or whether the 6 months of peace had demonstrated that distance was healthier than reconciliation. I called Trevor, catching him between adventure tours in Bend. Did you get the Thanksgiving invitation? I asked without preamble. Yeah, he confirmed. I'm planning to attend, actually. You should consider coming too. Why? So they can spend 4 hours explaining why I'm the problem? Because Mom has cancer, Trevor said quietly. The words hit like cold water. What? Breast cancer. Stage 2. She was diagnosed 6 weeks ago. Started treatment last month. She didn't want anyone to tell you because she was worried you'd feel obligated to come home out of guilt rather than genuine care. I sat down heavily on my couch, processing this information. 6 weeks. You've known for 6 weeks and didn't tell me? She specifically asked me not to, Trevor said defensively. She said you'd made your boundaries clear and she needed to respect them. But I think the Thanksgiving invitation is her way of trying to rebuild connection before treatment gets more intensive. What's her prognosis? Good, apparently. Caught relatively early. Treatment plan is aggressive but the doctors are optimistic. But it's changed her perspective on things. Made her reassess priorities. I felt the familiar tangle of obligation, resentment, and genuine concern that family relationships generated. 6 months ago, my mother had demanded I apologize for being assaulted by my sister. Now she had cancer and wanted to rebuild family connection. The emotional whiplash was staggering. I need to think about this, I said finally. Fair enough, Trevor agreed. But Nat? Whatever Mom's faults, she's still our mother. And life doesn't give us unlimited opportunities to fix broken relationships. After ending the call, I sat with the invitation and my conflicting emotions. The vindictive part of me wanted to decline, to let them experience my absence as consequence for years of dismissiveness. The compassionate part recognized that illness created legitimate urgency for reconciliation attempts. The practical part knew that unresolved family dynamics would shadow my professional success indefinitely. I called Helen Rothman, who had become an unexpected mentor over the past months. We'd established a pattern of monthly lunches where she shared insights from her decades navigating business and family as a woman in male-dominated fields. Natalie, she answered warmly. How's the permit review process going? Smoothly, actually. But I'm not calling about the project. I need advice about something personal. I explained the situation, the invitation, my mother's diagnosis, the 6 months of silence, and my uncertainty about whether reconciliation was wise or simply another form of accepting diminishment. Helen listened without interrupting, then spoke with her characteristic directness. The question isn't whether your mother deserves reconciliation. The question is whether you'll regret not attempting it when circumstances change and the opportunity passes. I don't want to go back to accepting their treatment, I said. 6 months of distance has been healthier than decades of trying to earn their approval. Then don't go back, Helen replied simply. But consider going forward. Not to the old dynamic, but to something new built on different terms. Your position has changed fundamentally. You're no longer the daughter hoping for validation. You're a successful professional willing to extend grace if they can meet you with genuine respect. What if they can't? I asked. Then you'll know definitively rather than wondering. And that knowledge, however painful, has value. I spent 3 days considering before finally texting my mother, I'll attend Thanksgiving. But we need to have honest conversation about family dynamics and what reconciliation requires. I won't return to the old patterns. Her response came within minutes, thank you. We can talk. I'm just glad you're willing to come home. The phrasing was telling. Not, come to dinner, but come home, as if 6 months of independence was temporary rebellion rather than permanent relocation of my center. The Wednesday before Thanksgiving, I drove to Portland with carefully managed expectations. I'd booked a hotel room rather than staying at my parents' house, maintaining physical space that represented my emotional boundaries. I'd prepared specific points I needed to address: acknowledgement of the assault, respect for my professional achievements, understanding that my choices weren't rejections of them but affirmations of myself. I arrived at my parents' house Thursday afternoon to find the familiar scene of organized hosting chaos. My mother directing kitchen activities, my father arranging furniture, Trevor helping wherever needed. But everything felt slightly off-center, like a photograph developed with wrong chemicals. My mother looked smaller than I remembered. Her hair, which she'd always kept meticulously colored, showed gray streaks she hadn't bothered to cover. She moved more carefully, as if her body required conscious attention rather than automatic response. "Natalie," she said when she saw me in the doorway, her voice carrying complex emotion I couldn't fully parse. "I'm so glad you came." We embraced awkwardly, both uncertain of appropriate protocol for this reunion. She felt more fragile than I expected, her shoulders sharp beneath her sweater. "How are you feeling?" I asked, releasing her. "Tired mostly," she admitted. "The treatment is manageable but exhausting. But I didn't want to cancel Thanksgiving. Family dinners feel more important now." My father appeared from his study, his expression guarded. "Natalie. Good to see you." "Dad," I replied neutrally. Trevor broke the tension by pulling me into an enthusiastic hug. "Good to see you, Nat. Come help me with the appetizers." Mom's instructions are characteristically detailed. As we worked in the kitchen, Trevor filled me in on family developments I'd missed. Amber was job hunting after her previous position at a marketing firm had been eliminated. She was living at home temporarily, which meant the house carried the particular tension of adult children reverting to adolescent roles. My father's company had stabilized, giving him more security but less flexibility. My mother's diagnosis had forced brutal reprioritization of everything they'd considered important. "Where's Amber?" I asked, noting her absence from the preparations. "She said she'd be here by 4, Trevor said. Which means probably 4:30. She's been avoiding being home when possible. The situation is uncomfortable for her." "The situation she created by assaulting me?" I clarified. "Yeah," Trevor agreed. "That situation." At 4:37, Amber arrived. She'd cut her hair shorter and lost weight that made her face look harder. We made eye contact across the living room, and I watched her expression cycle through several emotions before settling on defensive neutrality. "Hello, Natalie," she said formally. "Amber," I replied with equal formality. My mother orchestrated dinner with her usual precision, seating us at the formal dining table with places assigned as if she could engineer connection through strategic positioning. I was between Trevor and my father, directly across from Amber, with my mother at the head of the table. The meal began with strained small talk about Trevor's business, the unusually rainy autumn, and carefully neutral topics that avoided any mention of careers, engagements, or family conflicts. We were performing normalcy, and everyone knew it. Finally, as dessert was being served, my mother set down her fork and addressed the gathering with unexpected directness. "I want to talk about what happened at Amber's engagement party," she said. "We've all been avoiding it for 6 months, but my illness has clarified that avoiding difficult conversations is wasteful. Life doesn't give us unlimited time to fix things we've broken." The table went silent. Amber's eyes widened. My father's jaw tightened. Trevor looked between us with wary interest. "Go ahead," I said, my voice steady despite accelerated heartbeat. My mother took a breath. "Amber, what you did that night was wrong. Completely wrong. You assaulted your sister because you couldn't handle your emotions maturely. That's not acceptable regardless of the circumstances." Amber's face flushed. "Mom." "I'm not finished," my mother interrupted firmly. "And Gerald, you and I enabled that behavior by demanding Natalie apologize rather than holding Amber accountable. We prioritized avoiding social embarrassment over addressing actual violence. That was a failure of parenting." My father looked like he'd been struck. I felt equally shocked. This was not the conversation I'd anticipated. "More than that," my mother continued, her gaze moving to me, "we've spent years dismissing your accomplishments because they didn't fit the narrative we'd constructed about success. You built an extraordinary career despite our failure to acknowledge it. You earned professional respect we never gave you familial credit for. And when your success became impossible to ignore, our response was to blame you for complicating Amber's engagement rather than celebrating your achievement." Tears were forming in my mother's eyes now, but her voice remained steady. "I don't know if I can fix what we've broken," she said. "I don't know if you should even want to let me try. But I'm asking for the opportunity. Not to go back to how things were, but to build something different going forward. Something honest. The silence that followed was profound. I felt the weight of 6 months' anger competing with unexpected hope that real change might be possible. What prompted this? I asked finally. The diagnosis? Partly, my mother admitted. Facing mortality clarifies what actually matters. But also seeing the consequences of our treatment. You've been gone for 6 months, and we've had to live with what your absence revealed. How much vibrancy you brought that we took for granted. How much your achievements reflected values we'd claimed to hold. How empty the performative family gatherings feel without genuine connection. She turned to Amber. And watching your pain as your engagement fell apart made me recognize how we've failed you too. By teaching you that worth comes from status and comparison rather than authentic achievement. By rewarding performance over substance. Your sister didn't ruin your engagement, sweetheart. But the way we raised you to define success made it impossible for that engagement to survive honest examination. Amber's expression crumbled. So this is still my fault? Everything is always about perfect Natalie and disappointing Amber? No, my mother said firmly. It's about all of us learning to be honest. You assaulted your sister. That's your responsibility to acknowledge and address. But we created the environment where you felt threatened by her success rather than proud of it. That's our responsibility. I watched Amber struggle with emotions she'd probably never processed directly. Anger, shame, jealousy, grief, all competing for expression. I was jealous, Amber said finally, her voice breaking. I've always been jealous. You were smarter, more creative, more independent. I got by on being prettier and more social, but I always knew those were superficial advantages. And when Daniel recognized your professional authority, it confirmed what I'd always feared, that my achievements were performance while yours were substance. The honesty was startling and painful and necessary. I worked hard for what I built, I said carefully. But that doesn't diminish what you've accomplished. Different paths have different value. The problem was never that we chose differently. It was that our choices were used to diminish each other rather than celebrate both. I don't know how to not be jealous, Amber admitted. Then work on that, I replied. With a therapist. With genuine self-examination. But don't ask me to make myself smaller to make your jealousy manageable. I won't do that anymore. My father finally spoke, his voice rough with suppressed emotion. I owe you an apology, Natalie. Multiple apologies. For dismissing your career. For demanding you apologize when Amber assaulted you. For treating your independence as rejection rather than growth. I was wrong. About all of it. The words I'd waited years to hear felt both validating and insufficient. Apologies couldn't erase decades of dismissiveness. But they were a starting point. I appreciate that, I said. And I need you to understand that accepting your apology doesn't mean returning to old patterns. I've built a life that works for me. Reconciliation means you accepting that life, not me abandoning it to fit your expectations. We understand, my mother said. At least, we're trying to understand. The conversation continued for another hour, addressing specific incidents, acknowledging patterns, and attempting to establish new terms for relationship. It was messy and uncomfortable and occasionally painful. But it was honest in ways our family had never managed before. As I prepared to leave that evening, Amber stopped me at the door. I'm sorry I hit you, she said quietly. It was violent and wrong and inexcusable. I can't take it back, but I am genuinely sorry. Thank you, I replied. I appreciate you saying that. Daniel called me last week, she added. He's seeing someone new. An environmental lawyer who works on sustainability policy. He said she reminds him of you, passionate about work that matters, unwilling to compromise principles. How do you feel about that? I asked. Honestly? Sad. But also relieved. We weren't right for each other. I wanted what he represented more than who he was. That's not fair to either of us. The maturity in her assessment suggested genuine growth. "I hope you find what you're actually looking for," I said. "Not what you think you should want, but what genuinely makes you happy." As I drove back to my hotel, I felt the complex mixture of exhaustion and cautious hope that comes from difficult necessary conversations. The relationships weren't fixed, years of dysfunction couldn't be resolved in one Thanksgiving dinner. But something had shifted. A willingness to acknowledge truth rather than maintain comfortable fictions. Whether that shift would sustain or collapse under the weight of old patterns remained to be seen. But for the first time in my adult life, I felt like my family might actually see me rather than the projection they preferred. The foundation for potential reconciliation existed. Now we discover whether everyone involved had the commitment to build on it. 18 months after that Thanksgiving dinner, I stood in the lobby of the newly completed Cascade District Centerpiece building, watching late afternoon sunlight filter through the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the central plaza. The space was exactly as we'd envisioned, open and welcoming, with natural materials that connected to the neighborhood's industrial heritage while creating something unmistakably contemporary. The grand opening celebration would begin in 2 hours. City officials, community residents, project partners, and media representatives would tour the completed development that had transformed from ambitious proposal to functioning reality. It was the culmination of 2 years of intensive work, countless community meetings, design revisions, construction challenges, and collaborative problem solving. It was also, unexpectedly, a family reunion. My mother had insisted on attending despite still recovering from her final round of treatment. Her cancer was in remission, her prognosis excellent, but the 18 months of chemotherapy and radiation had aged her visibly. She moved more slowly now, tired more easily, but her determination remained intact. She'd driven up from Portland with my father that morning, checking into a hotel downtown and texting me their arrival with characteristic precision. Trevor had flown in from Bend, bringing his girlfriend Rachel, an environmental scientist who'd been fascinated by the sustainability features we'd integrated throughout the development. And Amber, who'd recently started working as a community outreach coordinator for a nonprofit housing organization, had asked hesitantly if she could attend to see what actual community-engaged development looks like in practice. The reconciliation process had been neither linear nor complete. We'd had setbacks, difficult conversations, and moments when old patterns reasserted themselves before being consciously disrupted. But we'd also had genuine progress, monthly video calls where my mother asked detailed questions about my projects, family dinners where my achievements were acknowledged rather than minimized, and gradual reconstruction of relationships based on honesty rather than performance. Amber and I had developed something resembling adult friendship, built on mutual respect for our different paths rather than comparison. She'd started therapy after the engagement ended, working through the jealousy and status anxiety that had shaped her choices for decades. I'd learned to extend grace for past behavior while maintaining firm boundaries about acceptable treatment going forward. The change wasn't dramatic or cinematic. It was incremental and sometimes frustrating. But it was real. "Ms. Carrington?" A voice interrupted my reflection. I turned to find Daniel Rothman approaching with a woman I didn't recognize, petite, dark-haired, with intelligent eyes and the confident posture of someone comfortable in her own authority. "Daniel," I said warmly. "Good to see you. This is Olivia Reyes," he introduced. "She's the environmental lawyer I mentioned." Olivia, Natalie Carrington, the architectural genius behind all of this. "Hardly genius," I demurred, shaking Olivia's hand. "More like persistent collaboration with very patient community partners." "Daniel's told me about the participatory design process," Olivia said. "It's impressive how thoroughly you integrated resident feedback. Most developers treat community input as a box to check rather than actual design guidance." "Most developers are missing opportunities," I replied. "Local knowledge is invaluable if you're willing to listen." We talked for several minutes about the project's sustainability features, the mixed-income housing model, and the community benefit agreement that ensured ongoing resident participation in building management. Olivia's questions were informed and specific, clearly coming from genuine expertise rather than polite interest. "I should let you prepare for the opening," she said eventually. "But I'd love to talk more about how you structured the community engagement process. I'm working with several neighborhood groups fighting displacement, and your model might be applicable. Absolutely, I agreed, exchanging contact information. Call me anytime. As they walked away, I noticed Daniel glance back with an expression that might have been gratitude or acknowledgement or simple recognition of how dramatically circumstances had shifted since that disastrous engagement party. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "We're in the lobby. Where should we meet you?" I found them near the main entrance, my parents looking slightly overwhelmed by the scale of the space, Trevor and Rachel examining the architectural details with genuine interest, and Amber studying the informational displays about community partnership with focused attention. "This is incredible, Natalie," my mother said, embracing me carefully. I knew the project was significant, but seeing it in person, it's extraordinary. "The team made it extraordinary," I replied. "I just coordinated the vision." "Don't do that," my father said quietly. "Don't minimize your role. You led this project. You made critical decisions that shaped what we're standing in. Own that." The directness from him was still surprising even after 18 months of intentional change. But I appreciated it. "You're right," I acknowledged. "I led this project, and I'm proud of what we accomplished." Amber had joined us, her expression thoughtful as she took in the building's details. "Can you show us the community spaces? The ones the residents helped design?" For the next hour, I gave my family a private tour, explaining design decisions, community requirements, and the collaborative process that had shaped every element. My mother asked questions about accessibility features. My father wanted to understand the structural engineering. Trevor was fascinated by the green roof system. And Amber took notes on her phone about community engagement methodologies she wanted to research further. They weren't just being polite. They were genuinely interested, asking follow-up questions that demonstrated actual listening and comprehension. As we reached the rooftop garden, overlooking the neighborhood and downtown Seattle beyond, my mother paused to rest on one of the benches we'd positioned for exactly this purpose. "I've been thinking," she said, "about all the years I spent worried about you being alone in Seattle, building your career instead of a family. I framed it as concern, but it was really judgment. I couldn't understand why you choose this path instead of the one I valued." "Mom, we've talked about this," I began. "Let me finish," she interrupted gently. "Standing here, seeing what you've built, not just this building, but your reputation, your expertise, your impact on actual communities, I realize how wrong I was. Not just about your career, but about what constitutes a meaningful life. You've built something that will serve thousands of people for decades. That's a legacy most people never achieve." "Thank you," I said, my throat tight with unexpected emotion. "I'm sorry it took me so long to see it," she continued. "And I'm sorry you had to earn recognition through such extraordinary achievement. You deserved basic respect long before this." My father cleared his throat. "Your mother's cancer diagnosis forced me to examine a lot of assumptions I'd held without questioning. About success, about family, about what actually matters. I realized I'd spent years being proud of having opinions rather than being wise enough to recognize when my opinions were limiting." "That's surprisingly philosophical for you, Dad," I observed. "Cancer makes philosophers of us all," he replied with dry humor. "But I mean it, Natalie. I'm proud of you. Not despite the path you chose, but because of it. You saw something we couldn't, and you had the courage to pursue it even when we made that pursuit harder than it needed to be." Trevor, who'd been listening quietly, added his perspective. "For what it's worth, you've always been the one I measured myself against. Not Amber, despite Mom's obvious preference for her choices. You showed me that it was possible to leave and build something authentic. That gave me permission to do the same in Bend." "I never knew that," I admitted. "You weren't supposed to," he replied. "But it's true. You were the trailblazer whether you intended to be or not." Amber had been silent through these exchanges, standing slightly apart and looking out over the city. Finally, she spoke. "I need to say something," she began, turning to face me. "I've spent the past year and a half in therapy working through jealousy and comparison and all the ways I built my identity on unstable foundations. And one thing I've come to understand is that I genuinely didn't comprehend what you do. Not because I'm stupid, but because I never asked the right questions. I saw architect and thought about drawing pretty buildings. I didn't understand that you're actually designing how people live, how communities function, how spaces shape human interaction. She gestured at the development around us. This isn't just construction. It's social engineering at its best. You've created infrastructure for human flourishing. That's not comparable to what I was doing, planning events and managing brand perception. Those things have value, but they're not creating lasting positive impact the way this does. Different work has different value, I said, echoing the conversation we'd had at Thanksgiving. Comparison isn't helpful. Maybe not, Amber agreed. But acknowledgement is. You're doing important work that improves people's lives in tangible ways. I should have recognized that years ago. I'm sorry I didn't. The apologies and acknowledgments felt both validating and slightly surreal. This wasn't the family dynamic I'd grown up with. It was something we were actively constructing together, imperfectly but intentionally. As the grand opening ceremony began, I stood on the stage facing several hundred attendees, community residents, city officials, project partners, journalists, and my family seated together in the third row. I'd given dozens of presentations over the past 2 years, but this one felt different. Not because the stakes were higher, but because I was finally being seen accurately by the people whose recognition I'd once desperately wanted and eventually learned to live without. I spoke about collaborative design, community partnership, and sustainable development that serves existing residents rather than displacing them. I thanked the community members who'd invested time and knowledge into shaping the project. I acknowledged my team at Meridian and our partners at Hartwell and Rothman Development. And I emphasized that this project was a model for what urban development could be when profit and community benefit were treated as compatible rather than competing objectives. When I finished, the applause was genuine and sustained. But what mattered most was seeing my family's expressions: pride without caveats, recognition without minimization, celebration of achievement they finally understood. The reception afterward brought countless conversations with community members sharing how specific design elements reflected their input, with city officials discussing replicating the model in other neighborhoods, with journalists requesting interviews about participatory design methodology. Helen Rothman found me between conversations, pulling me aside with characteristic directness. Your family looks different, she observed. More genuine. Less performative. We've been working on it, I replied. It's not perfect, but it's honest. That's all any relationship can be, Helen said. Honest effort toward mutual understanding. The rest is details. As the evening wound down, I stood once again in the central lobby, now filled with people experiencing the space we'd created. My mother approached, looking tired but content. I should get back to the hotel, she said. But thank you for letting us be part of this. It means more than you probably realize. I'm glad you came, I said honestly. All of you. Natalie, she said, taking my hand. I know we can't undo the past. But I want you to know that I see you now. Really see you. And I'm genuinely proud of the woman you've become, not despite our failures but in spite of them. That means a lot, Mom, I replied, and meant it. As my family left together, chatting among themselves about dinner plans and weekend activities, I felt the particular satisfaction that comes not from achieving what you'd originally wanted, but from building something better than you'd imagined possible. I hadn't received my family's approval and validation when I most needed it. I'd learned to build a life without that foundation, creating my own measures of worth and success. But now, having proven I didn't need their recognition, I could accept it when offered freely rather than extracted reluctantly. The Cascade District project would serve its community for decades. The methodologies we developed would influence urban planning beyond Seattle. My career would continue evolving toward greater impact and authority. These were the achievements that mattered, the foundation I'd built through skill and determination and refusal to accept diminishment. But having my family finally understand and celebrate that foundation, however belatedly, added a dimension I hadn't known I was missing. Not completion, but enrichment. Not validation that defined my worth, but connection that enhanced it. I thought about that rainy night 18 months ago, standing with a split lip at my sister's engagement party, hearing Daniel say, "Hi, boss," and watching my family's narrative collapse. That moment of forced truth had been painful and humiliating and ultimately necessary. It had detonated the comfortable fictions we'd all maintained, creating space for something more authentic to emerge. Not all families could make that journey. Not all relationships could survive that much honesty. But ours had, imperfectly and with ongoing work, and that was its own kind of achievement. As I locked the building and headed to my car, I received a text from Amber. "Thank you for showing us your world today. I'm starting to understand why you fought so hard to build it. Proud of you, sis." 3 words I'd waited decades to hear, proud of you. They didn't erase the past or fully repair the damage. But they suggested a future where family connection enhanced rather than constrained individual achievement. Where success could be celebrated rather than resented. Where honest relationships replaced performative ones. I drove back toward my Seattle apartment, not the hotel room I'd once barely afforded, but a space I'd chosen and furnished to reflect who I'd become, and felt the particular peace that comes from knowing you've built something substantial both professionally and personally. The foundation was solid. The structure was complete. And the family relationships that had once seemed irreparably broken had been renovated into something different but functional. Not perfect. Just honest. And ultimately, that was all any of us could really ask for. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.